there, I'm Jess from Make and Do Crew, and in this video I'm going to show you exactly how to crochet a granny stitch hexagon. So these hexagons are the foundation of my Campfire Cardigan pattern, but even if you're not following along with that specific pattern, these skills will help you crochet a hexagon that can be the base for any type of hexagon cardigan that you want to customize. Please check out the description box below for links to the free Campfire Cardigan pattern, as well as the Lion Brand kit and our printable PDF.
To start our hexagons, we are going to begin with a magic ring, and the way that I like to do that is just fold my loop over, insert my hook, pull up a loop like this, and then just pull a slip stitch to close it. So then I'm going to chain 3 stitches. This part can be a little slippery, but it'll get a lot easier once we get this magic ring finished. I like to untwist the magic ring a little bit at this point, and then we're going to work 2 double crochets right here in the loop. So there's 1 and 2, and in this pattern, we are going to refer to clusters often, and a cluster just means a group of 3 double crochets. So that first chain 3, that's going to count as 1 double crochet. So we have 1 cluster here. We need to end up with 6 clusters, and those are going to become our 6 sides of our hexagons. So now I'm going to chain 1. So I have 1 cluster and 1 chain 1, and now we need 5 more clusters and chain 1s. So I'm going to double crochet right there in the loop. That's 1, and then 2 and 3. So that's another cluster now. And then I'm going to follow it up with a chain 1. So now I have 1 cluster, 1 chain 1, and 1 cluster, 1 chain 1. So let's do that same thing 4 more times so that we end up with 6 clusters. All right, and now I have 6 clusters, and believe me, it is worth triple checking this number because everything is based off having 6 clusters here. So there's definitely been some times I've ended up with 5 and not realized it for a few rounds. So you want to double check that, and I'm going to pull the strand of yarn out here from my magic ring or loop because it just makes it easier to close it down and tighten it up. And then I've done my last chain 1, so I'm going to insert my hook at the top of that chain 3 from the beginning of the round and then just slip stitch to close it off. So now what we should have are 6 clusters and 6 chain 1 spaces. And this pattern is always worked in turned rounds or rows. So what that means is that at the end of every row, we're going to turn our work and work back in the opposite direction. And whether you are going to use 1 yarn throughout or change colors every round, it doesn't matter. We're going to work back in the opposite direction. So for simplicity, I'm going to keep this color attached to teach you the next step in this. And then in a few minutes, I'll show you how to change colors at the end of a round if that's what you'd like to do. So for round 2, I'm going to chain 3, and I like to make these chains kind of tight because I find that they're better disguised that way. And I'm going to turn my work, and this is the only time where it's kind of hard to see the spaces we're working into because they're only a chain 1 space. But from here, I'm going to put another double crochet and another double crochet. So if you remember, that chain 3 counts as our first double crochet. Now we have 2 more, so we have our first cluster here. After that, we're going to chain 3, and that's how we're going to work our corners from now on. So this is going to be our first real corner here. I've chained 3, and now I'm going to work another cluster right in that same chain 1 space. So on this round, we're going to double the number of clusters we have. We're going to go from 6 to 12. And that's going to mean that every space that we currently have from round 1 is going to get 2 clusters and separated by chain 3. So now I'm going to work in the next upcoming corner here. So I'm going to chain 1 in between, and then I'm going to go to the next corner and I'm going to do 3 double crochets and then 3 chains and 3 more double crochets. So that'll create 1 cluster, and then 3 chains separating it to make the corner, and then 1 more cluster. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have going here. You'll see here's my first cluster, chain 3, second cluster, this is a chain 1, that is some kind of hair. Here's another cluster, another chain 3, and another cluster. So my next step would be to chain 1, then work another set of 3 double crochets, 3 chains, and 3 double crochets here. And then we're gonna chain 1, and we're gonna repeat that all the way around. So what we should end up with at the end of the round is 6 corner chain 3 spaces and 12 total clusters. All right, at the end of round 2, I'm going to switch to a new color. So this is definitely optional. If you don't want to have any ends to weave in, just pick a great color and stick with it, or else use a self-striping yarn. But I am going to switch now to this nice mustard color. And the way I'm going to do that is I have my last chain 1 here on my hook, but I haven't slip stitched to my chain 3 from the beginning of the round yet. So I'm going to insert my hook there, and then I'm going to grab my new color of yarn and perform that slip stitch with my new color. So that makes a little bit cleaner join. I've already snipped off my first color, so I can hold them both in my hand. And I find that I just need to hold this tight as I work my first chain 3 of the next round. But as you can see, it's a pretty clean transition. And now I'm going to chain 3, and I'm going to turn and work back in the other direction. So now we're working with our new color, and you can see this is starting to get a little bit wavy, and that is intentional. You can see here a very baby half cardigan emerging. You have what's going to be a sleeve and the main body there. So if it's not wavy, you wouldn't have enough fabric to create this whole front and back. So it's not supposed to lay flat, at least after round 3 or so. So now we're going to continue increasing in each corner. So the corners are the spaces that we have our chain 3s, and it's going to become clearer and clearer what those are. But for now, we have just 1 space in between each corner, 1 chain, 1 space. So in each chain 1 space, we're just going to work a cluster, and then we're going to chain 1, and that's going to move us over to the corner. So here is the rest of my cluster here. So I have that chain 3 from the beginning, and then 2 more, and you can see it's already getting a little loose here, so I'm just going to tighten it down, and then I'll deal with that more when I weave in my ends. But that's kind of normal for it to get a little bit loose when you're changing colors. Now I'm going to chain 1, and I'm at the corner now, my first corner. So just like before, we're going to crochet a cluster, so that's 3 double crochet, and then we're going to separate it by 3 chains. First cluster, 1, 2, 3, and then 3 more double crochet. All right, so you can see that corner looks a little bit more distinct, and so I'm going to chain 1 after that cluster because I'm just going to work a cluster. We're not quite to another corner yet, so I chained 1. I'm going to work 3 double crochet here, and then I'm going to chain 1 again, and now I'm at another corner. So if you remember, just like we did before, we're going to do 3 double crochet, chain 3, and 3 more double crochet. At the end of my corner, I'm going to chain 1, and in each chain 1 space, we're just going to work another 3 double crochets. That's always going to have a chain 1 space before it and after it, and then in the corners, we're going to work our 1 cluster of 3 double crochets, 3 more chains, and then another cluster of 3 double crochets. So if you are not much of an auditory learner and you want to just look at something really clear and visual, the stitch chart can be super helpful, just showing you where the increases happen and how frequently they happen. Because you'll see there's really just a couple rules to know with this entire hexagon, and that is that in every corner, we're going to work a cluster, and then chain 3, and then another cluster, and then we're always going to do a chain 1 space between the rest of the clusters, and then in any chain 1 space we're just going to work a regular cluster. So I'm going to complete this round here, and then at the end of this round 3 we should have a total of 18 clusters, and we should always have 6 corners because this is a hexagon, and then each side should have 3 clusters, so 1, 2, 3. So it's good to check here and make sure you're on track, and then in a couple of rounds it will be important to measure our gauge. That's how we're going to make sure that the sweater sweater that you're making ends up the size that you expect it to be. And we're gonna measure that so that if you have to start over, it's not that much work, but if somehow you have managed to hit the gauge on the first try, you'll just be off to the races and continue working on your hexagon. So I'm going to switch colors now. And again, you definitely do not need to switch colors every round. Only do this if you're okay with weaving in ends because it does create a lot of them. If you're not okay with that, just work with the same color for more rounds. You don't have to switch every round. If you switched every 4 rounds, you'd have a lot fewer ends to weave in. Okay, so I just pulled that last slip stitch through using my new color, and my previous color is fastened off. So now I can just chain 3. Again, I'm holding my tails tight there. I'm gonna tighten down my chain and turn my work and work in the opposite direction. As you can see, it's becoming clearer what are the sides and what are the corners here in our hexagon. So we're always going to be finishing our round on a side. So it's kind of like in the middle of the side, but then we're gonna be working toward a corner. So I just worked my first cluster there. I did a chain 1 to get to the corner, and now this is where I'm going to put those 2 clusters and my chain 3. All right, so there is my first corner. I'm going to chain 1, and then now I have a couple spaces where I'm just going to work a regular cluster, no corner. So this is how we're going to work like this around the hexagon. And we're just going to continue working these hexagon rounds. Each round should increase by 1 cluster per side. So if you remember, in round 2, we had 2 clusters per side. In round 3, we have 1, 2, 3. And then in round 4, we're gonna have 1, 2, 3. And then once I add the corner here, we'll have 4 per side. So that's marked in the pattern. And we will meet back here in just a minute, and I will show you how to measure your gauge.
Okay, I'm gonna interrupt all this fun crocheting to talk about everyone's favorite step, checking your gauge. Now, if this is your first sweater, then you've maybe never done this before, but when you're crocheting a garment, it's super important to make sure that your stitches are the same size as the designer stitches, because that's what's going to guarantee that your finished project is the same size as what's listed in the pattern. So in this case, we're going to measure our hexagon in 2 spots. And at the end of round 7, which is this off-white round for me, it's this cream colored round, we're going to measure both the
Radius
to check our gauge and then the length of the sides. So in order to measure the
radius,
if you remember from geometry class, it's from the center out to the edge. So I'm going to measure right here to the edge of that cream colored round, and I have 4 inches there. It's upside down. If you don't have upside down eyeballs, there you go, 4 inches. So that shows me I'm on track for the gauge. If you are just slightly bigger or smaller than that, you're probably fine to keep going. I would just adjust your hook size from here on. Like I said, this pattern is quite forgiving, and because you can try it on as you go, you can sort of decide, okay, I've made this hexagon big enough, I'm gonna stop now, even if you're off a bit from the pattern gauge. But if you are measuring more like 3.5 inches, then you're gonna wanna remake your hexagon with a larger hook. And if you're measuring more like 4.5 inches, you're gonna wanna remake your hexagon with a smaller hook. Now the second place we're going to measure to double check that we are on the right track is the distance between one corner and another corner. So that's the length of one side. And you can see here, I'm following again this cream colored side. So I can assume it starts right about there and ends right about there. We want this to measure 7 inches to 7.25 inches. So you'll want to repeat this measurement on a few sides just to make sure that your tension is even. But as long as you're in that range of around 7 to 7.25 inches, you should be good on gauge. Again, if it's much smaller than that, remake your hexagon with a bigger hook. Much bigger than that, remake it with a smaller hook. Gauge is super personal, so it's always okay to adjust your hook size from what's listed in the pattern. At this point, you know everything necessary to crochet your own granny stitch hexagons. So go ahead and complete as many rounds as necessary for the size that you're making. And when you're finished with 2, you will have the start of what's going to be a very cool hexagon sweater. Thanks for watching and happy crocheting!